I want to start with a brief recursion to the abolition of man. I want you to tell me, what statements about a waterfall does the Green Book declare invalid? Does it preclude saying this?
They weren't necessarily saying that you can't say that. They're just saying that in saying something to that extent, you would really be talking about your own feelings and emotions.
Yeah, I think that's what they were saying. They were saying, it's fine to, this is just a vocabulary choice. You can say sublime, awesome, pretty, whatever you happen to feel, but understand that when you say it, you are not making any statement that makes any sense about the waterfall. You are merely giving commentary about your own feelings. How about this one?
It doesn't have any solemnity to it, it's just your perception of it, but I think Lewis says the waterfall is itself more.
That's attributing something to the waterfall, right? The authors of the Green Book don't really commit themselves clearly on this. They don't discuss this topic. They sweep it aside casually, not really noticing that it's a serious question. And that's Lewis's objection to them. This is Lewis's view. Those who know the Tao, that is, all these various religious views from around the world, he argues, can hold that to call children delightful or old men venerable, which, by the way, you certainly should, is not simply to record a psychological fact about our own parental or filial emotions at that moment, but to recognize a quality which demands a certain response from us whether we make it or not. That is the Tao, that is the sort of pervasive moral sense that tends to emerge in the literature of virtually all cultures, seems to say, in these examples, it's a delight to be around children. You should feel delight around children. Or when you're around old people, you should feel a certain amount of respect for them. No emotion is, in itself, he goes on, a judgment. In that sense, all emotions and sentiments are logical. Illogical would mean in conflict with logic. But logical means they have no logical value at all. And he says of all emotions and sentiments that they are logical. But they can be reasonable or unreasonable as they conform to reason or fail to conform. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it. That's what Lewis means by the chest when he talks about having this kind of educated, practiced sense of trying to control your emotions in the right way. He doesn't mean that whatever your emotions are necessarily right. In fact, this specifically argues the opposite, that there's a serious need to use your head as much as possible to try to control your emotions, because there really is right and wrong in your emotions. The natural environment is worthy of awe and respect. Wow. Now I want to move into the weight of glory, which is a sermon. In speaking of this desire, Lewis says, for our own far-off country, which we find in ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. I'm almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you, the secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. Now, this is an example of a kind of humanist thinking, this is in the tradition of Plato, that takes seriously ourselves as evidence. Plato has his Socrates take as his fundamental notion, gnóthis auton, know yourself. The core of what a person should know is you really should pay attention to yourself and take as evidence your own perceptions. Lewis observes in himself, and it took him a long time, as you'll see in Surprised by Joy when you read it. Over time, he became aware of a sense of longing and dissatisfaction, and he began to puzzle about it. What does it mean? And he wants to point out that for him at any rate, this is an experience, and he thinks it's a universal experience. So what do you think? is this desire?
The approval of God, the approval of all human beings.
He's embarrassed to say it, but he says it's like having the universe, God, what's great in the universe, say, not too bad a job. To please God, to be a real ingredient in the divine happiness, to be loved by God, not merely pitied, but delighted in, as an artist delights in his work, or a father in a son. It seems impossible, a weight or burden of glory which our thoughts can hardly sustain, but so it is. But to him, this is an insight into one thoughtful religious person. If you are religious, it gives you a way to kind of sharpen your own religious thinking. If you're not religious, it provides a window into the mind and thinking of some people, at any rate, who are religious. He experiences life as a kind of desire, and he thinks that's important. He feels awe for things, but can never quite meet the object of the awe in the way that he wants to, and can never quite be a part of it, and it always feels out there and beyond. And so there's something inherently dissatisfying or unsatisfying about life for him. This desire, do you recognize it? Have you experienced it? You know what he's talking about? That surprises me. I'm really, I'm stunned. Good. I mean, I recognize it. And the next one? This belief issues in a kind of practical outcome. It may be possible, he says, for each person to think too much of his own potential glory hereafter. It's hardly possible for him to think too often or too deeply about that of his neighbor. It's a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other to one or other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. Do you get how different this view of people is from what is allowed within the context of the Green Book? If you look at your neighbor and say, my neighbor is a human, it's wonderful. The Green Book responds, but you do have some interesting feelings, don't you? If you strip out the capacity to think this way of people, Lewis thinks you strip out the capacity of humans to do heroic things. He's offering an alternative reading of the Christian judgment. Do you notice in the Great Divorce you don't get all this, you need to be washed in the blood stuff? You can come in, you were washed in the blood, you can't come in, you weren't washed in the blood, you didn't go to church, you didn't, you're not religious enough, you belong to the wrong church, or you didn't go to any church. Stuff like this is not mentioned at all. He thinks that this longing is desensitized, and he wants to resensitize it. And then because he thinks it's crucial, the longing really tells us what we're meant for, in his view. And what we're meant for is to find our way in to the, he keeps talking remember in The Weight of Glory, he keeps talking about this feeling that we're on the wrong side of the door. We've come to a door, we're on the outside, and we can never quite find the way in. Our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but the truest index of our real situation. This is for the religious among you. It doesn't mean you have to go to church, but if you recognize in yourself some sort of religious impulse, the desire that Lewis speaks of is a very important element in my religious impulse. And next, for the non-religious, I don't experience such a desire, or I experience such a desire but dismiss it as delusional, according to the Green Book. I experience such a desire and consider it important, but I'm not religious. I think that Plato and Lewis would say, okay, we're operating under a different definition of religious, because in his book you'd be religious. That is, this is the very fact that you say that longing means something puts you in the same intellectual framework as what he thinks of as religious. Lewis's focus and desire helps me better understand religious thinking, whether you are a religious person or you aren't. Okay.